Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, in today's episode, we're launching into the Canopy construction. So there's a bit of research, and then we look at the design and the 3D printing of some of the Canopy components. So you'll recall from the last episode we got as far as installing some windows and also the beginning of the interior. So I did mention in that episode that the following episode will be to continue on with that and actually do the final interior layer, which of course is the interior decor. Now, what I've decided to do is just to hold that off briefly while I actually explore the canopy. So although there's no real bearing on that in terms of the interior, I thought I'd launch into the canopy process simply because of the anticipated complexity of the canopy design. So this video is essentially broken into two areas. The first area is delving into a bit of research and investigation as to how the canopy was originally constructed and what kind of design features it had, and essentially some dimensions and things like that. Now, of course, there is no recorded design drawings for the canopy, or at least that we've been able to find. Of course, we had the beautiful plans for the main station building, but of course that excluded the canopy, only referencing a small part where the canopy anchors to the external walls of the main station building. So there is also a very small selection of quite poor quality photographs as well, but there is one photograph that is taken reasonably close up, but of course the quality of that photo is pretty rough. So it meant really quite a lot of digging and delving to sort of work out how this canopy was constructed basically and what the design consisted of. So the second half of this video, we look at the 3D printed components that I've produced, which were designed up on the computer initially, and that is really based on the research. So this is quite a lengthy video, but I really didn't want to break these two parts into separate videos because they go hand in hand. So apologies for the length of the video, but they really do need to be together to provide the context for what I've been up to. So I think without further ado, let's just jump into what I got up to. So for all of those who've been following this station build, you'll be aware that at points I certainly struggled in terms of finding reference material for the structures, and at various points it was quite a struggle. Fortunately, we found original station plans for the main station building, but then of course when it came to the platform 2 building there was just nothing at all, so there was a lot of guesswork. So fortunately the main station building, platform 1 building, of course came with these plans as I mentioned, but of course one of the components that's missing from those plans of course is some detail about the canopy that used to be there. Now there's a small reference to the canopy, how it's attached to the main wall structure, but there's no actual plans or dimensions for the canopy itself, for the entire structure. So that really sort of leaves, or it's left me in quite a predicament in terms of trying to work out how the canopy structure was designed and assembled. So if we go back to the mock-up that I did at the end of last year, I put together a basic, very basic structure of how I guess it was more to sort of represent the canopy proportions rather than the actual structure itself. So it's very simplified in that respect. So there's only really one photograph, and it's a very poor quality photograph that exists that actually shows the canopy in place at this actual station, and it's very difficult really to sort of pick out what was going on in here, but I have sort of taken a look at the upper structure, so the structure that creates the apex and the canopy roof. And I think what it looks like from this particular photograph, which apparently dates from 1956. Now, I'm not too sure how accurate that might be, and it looks as if the glass has been removed from the canopy. So this is the station after it's closed, and it's been turned into two flats, and you can see the main entrance door into the booking hall has actually been blocked up. But there's this what looks like a sort of a zigzag girder structure that runs the length down the middle, and I've just highlighted those components. And as far as I can see, it's so difficult to tell from this, it doesn't really appear to be any girder structure that goes perpendicular to that structure, so I'm not quite sure how it worked. Then underneath that you can see is the girders. So these would have been, I'm guessing, maybe I-beams of some sort, that we can see the shape to this day in some of the brickwork on the outside of the building where they anchored into the brickwork. And I've just highlighted those I-beams. Now, of course, they're different lengths, so the two at each end go into the protruding walls of each end section, and then the two central I-beams, of course, go back further into the alcove where the door is, so they're longer. Now, what's really quite tricky to work out here, and it's working out the corner supports, so those sort of ornate brackets. Now, you can faintly make them out there, but you can't really see any detail about how the shape or the design of them is actually made out. Probably the only significant element that I can really pick out in there is this sort of quarter arch shape that comes up from the post and up to the underside of the I-beam. So in terms of the post itself, two of those still exist at the station. Of course, they've been moved, but it's fine in terms of the posts, in terms of working out the shape and dimensions for those. It is this upper section with these ornate corner supports. So what I managed to find, and once again it's still not an overly brilliant photo, but it does actually show a little bit more clarity with these corner supports, and this is with one of the other stations that were on this line. Now I'm going to try my attempt at some Welsh pronunciation, so all of those from Wales, please correct me if I don't get this correct, but I do believe it's pronounced Efail Isaf. Now please do correct me if I'm wrong with that pronunciation. So as you can see here in this photo, you can start to pick out a little bit of the shape. Now it's nowhere near enough for me to go along or to make reference to in a lot of ways, and to some degree I sort of wonder whether it kind of looks like it may have been a bit different from the Wenvo station. So I don't know whether they used different designs at different stations and it was based on local suppliers or local manufacturers, whether they may have changed. So zooming in and taking a close look, and I have actually attempted to digitally enhance this image as best I can, the same with the previous image as well, and you can now sort of pick out there's a common sort of curve or quarter curve coming up, and then you've also got what looks like a semicircular shape that's in there, and it really does sort of lend itself to almost some kind of floral type design or organic style of design. So with that, and actually taking a little wee screenshot there and actually doing a reverse Google image search, of course it brings up loads and loads of cast iron and wrought iron embellishments that you would find on Victorian buildings. So what I actually stumbled across, and this I think that was actually on an auction site somewhere in the UK, is the remnants of a cast or wrought iron embellishment from some kind of balcony or something like that. What's left of it, it's in a very bad shape, but when I looked at the corner supports there, they looked very, very similar. So in my eye, I just felt that this is close enough, this will actually do. And of course there are a number of photos taken for this auction website. I don't know how much it was selling for, and I don't know whether it's current or whether it was historical, but there was enough here for me to work up a design on the computer. So what I basically did is took the photo, took one of the best photos, straightened it out and made it perpendicular right angles and so forth, and then began tracing that using Illustrator. So I didn't do an automatic trace, I literally did it by hand, doing all the geometric shapes and curves and so forth, but to a certain degree simplifying it down, because one of the things that I knew would probably be a significant challenge would be for the 3D printer to be able to reproduce such an ornate component at such a microscopic scale. So to a certain degree I simplified the design, and I took out some of the extra embellishments and merged some of the elements together in the hopes that that would allow the 3D printer to be able to produce the elements successfully. So once I'd actually done that and I'd printed out one, it turned the print essentially into scrambled eggs. So it was far too ornate, even after I'd simplified the design initially. So I went back to the drawing board and simplified the design even further. And although when it's blown up on the screen it looks rather crude, when it's reproduced it's such a small scale and the 3D printer successfully managed to print it, it actually looked the part. It looked really good and it printed it nice and cleanly. So looking at the rest of the canopy structure and going back to a previous photo where I managed to pick out this obviously some kind of central lattice type structure or girder structure that runs lengthways down the canopy at the ridge, so that's therefore creating the canopy ridge profile. And as far as I could tell, there were no supports that went perpendicular to that were actually lining up with the I-beams that came out at the wall. So I went on a hunt for other canopy structures that may be very similar, and I really couldn't find anything. And until I came across this photo, and this is possibly the closest I could find, even though it's still nowhere near what the canopy structure appears to look like. But what it does show is this central support that runs lengthways down supporting the ridge. Now the only difference with this one of course is that the lattice girder structure that's running lengthways has got far more diagonal supports. And the other thing too is we've also got the perpendicular supports as well that create the profile of the canopy roof. Now from that photo of the canopy at the old station, I can't see whether those supports may or may not exist. So it's a little bit of guesswork there, but what I've decided to do is base it more along the lines of this canopy so that it's actually got both, because I really do believe it's going to need it purely just in model terms for the rigidity and strength of the actual structure. So while I've got this photo up on the screen, one of the interesting aspects to note here is not so much the colours itself, but the scheme of colours, what's been painted, what's been highlighted in different colours. Now there's no colour photo references for any of the canopies at any of the stations on this railway line, the Barry Railway. It's all black and white, and to some degree you can pick out lighter colours and darker colours, what would have been darker and lighter, but apart from that there's really it's a total guess as to what's what. So I'm also taking a bit of artistic license when it comes to the paint scheme or the colour scheme for the canopy as well. And this photo here is probably a similar route that I'm going to go down in terms of the colour scheme. Now the window trim, the outer window trim, of course I've chosen what would represent sort of that Barry Railway red colour, deep sort of maroon red colour. So if you could imagine this canopy here, we've got the white posts, but then the trim and the canopy supports and things like that. Imagine that if it was in the red, in that sort of red maroon colour instead. So that's sort of the route that I want to go down, but where the canopy supports, the corner supports, might remain in a white, like how they are shown here. Now there's some other examples as well that I've taken a look at, and the image on the right is probably very sort of close to the colour scheme of the posts and what I'd like to do there. So if you could imagine, the blue would actually be the maroon or the deep red colour. But some other examples of how canopy supports, posts and so forth been done at other stations. Some are very ornate. They've been, just about every single element's been picked out in opposite colours and so forth. And then in some other cases, there is, and that's in the top left corner, the whole thing has just been painted one colour. So nothing's really been picked out at all except for the base. So there's all manner of colour combinations. So I'm very much looking at going down the route where the bottom half of the post is in the maroon, then the central main sort of midsection of the canopy post is in white, and then the upper half is a mixture of the maroon red with the corner supports, the wrought iron or cast iron, wherever they are supports, they might remain in the white, but then the upper part of the canopy, the girder structure up above, would be in the maroon. So we'll jump over and actually take a look at what I've been producing on the 3D printer. So this is what I've managed to produce so far from the 3D printer, and as you can see, there's all manner of posts and supports and girder structures and so forth, and all of this is completely useless because all of this stuff here is just all of the test runs and test prints that I've done to fine-tune the canopy structure down to something that's actually going to be sturdy enough to work, but also to assemble and put together. So unlike some folk who may actually 3D print the entire canopy in one go and have all those supports that are needed during the 3D printing process, I'm going down the route like I did with the footbridge, is producing flat elements that are then put together. So it's very much like a kit set that you'd buy off the shelf. So it took quite a bit to go through it, to fine tune it, to revise the design after I'd produced some of these, and then I realised I could change that and do something different. Now the beauty about it is the fact that you can just keep doing it until you get it right, which is basically what it sort of came down to in the end. So this is all just spare, it's just sort of, I guess, I don't know, end up in the bin, I guess. Now here we've got some very bizarre looking pieces here that I've 3D printed as well. Now this actually relates to, and we'll go through it in a second, is these canopy posts are basically, they're two halves, and I've mentioned it before that I just sort of felt the easiest way of doing this is that you've got two halves that you then glue together to create the whole. And it was the same as what I did for the footbridge for the posts, so the round posts. So essentially really it's an entire structure, it's cut in half, so when it's printed on the filament printer, it prints flat on the printer, so you don't have to worry about supports needing to be added, so they're printed like that. And then the idea is that we will glue these together. Now the issue of course I had with the footbridge was when it came to actually gluing the posts together, it was actually quite difficult to get them perfectly lined up as to avoid a visual seam that ran down the middle. So that's what these are, and there's all number of versions that had to change when I changed things with these elements. So these are essentially jigs that I produced that is going to assist when it comes to actually lining up the two halves together so that they're perfectly lined up, because it's quite critical that they are, because then other components slot in. So we'll get into it in a little bit more detail, and I'll just clear this lot out of the way. And take a look at actually what the real or the final prints are. So we've got the girder structure or lattice structure that runs lengthways, so we've got that. These are two of the outer edges, and here we've got the jig. So this is the correct jig that we'll be using to basically put the two halves of these post structures together. So one of the other aspects too that I sort of had to work out is, what is the best way of doing this? Do I paint all these parts individually and then glue the whole thing together, or do I glue the whole thing together and then paint it afterwards? And I think, and this is purely experimental, as I think I will actually assemble the entire structure and then paint it, because if I paint each individual component, then that paint is actually going to add just a micron of layers to where components actually fit together. And then of course also there may be an issue with the glue. The glue might bleed the paint, or it might not attach properly because the paint has created a barrier between that and the plastic or the PLA. So the glues that I'm using are just essentially CA glue. So there's this very thin liquid version, and then there's a medium version which is a little bit more sort of gel like, which is quite good for gluing the posts together, the two halves together. And then this one here is quite good for fusing joints that you assemble first and then drop them. So it's a little bit like the Tamiya glues, or what would I say, plastic card glues and things like that. So I did do some experimentation in terms of how these columns and the I-beam structure and the corner supports are to be painted, and there was two options really. One was to hand paint the deep red, the burgundy colour, or another option was to mask out the areas that are going to remain white, hence why I'm using white PLA, and then spray paint the rest of it. Now during that experimentation process I used quite a good masking tape. It's actually from a hardware store, so it's not really designed for models. I could have used the Tamiya masking tape, and I did have some of that, but I actually found this is absolutely perfect for doing this. A little bit more tacky, but it's still got quite a nice fine adhesive to it. So it really does actually create a very crisp edge. So it was a case of masking out the white areas of the pre-assembled post, so the two halves already glued together, and then popping on a alligator clip and spray painting it, and it actually came out really well. So these are just purely experimental in terms of that. That was just to see how well this would work. I did actually two versions, one where I used a primer first and then the red, the burgundy colour, and then one where I just simply sprayed the burgundy on. So the interesting thing is, of course, when I did spray it, it does actually close the gap in terms of other components fitting. So hence why I'm going to go down the route of assembling the entire structure first and then spray painting it. So the one thing I will do though is, because it's quite fiddly applying the masking tape to the areas that I'm going to mask off, so I'll be applying those areas first to these supports before I actually put the whole thing together. So with that said, we'll just take a look at this jig. So the jig itself is designed up in Tinkercad along with all of these other components, and the pegs and the positions of everything are positioned in such a way as to lock this component in place, or lock it in here. So if I slot this in here, and the idea is it gets butted up against that end, the pegs in here hold this exactly in the right position, and then it's a case of then laying down the other half on top in exactly the correct position, and we end up with everything nicely lined up. So we're just going to go ahead, we'll just do one of these. I won't go through and do all 6, I think it is, or yeah, 6 of these. And I found the easiest way of doing this in terms of applying the glue is we're using not the thin but the medium. So this is more, it's a slightly more gel like glue, and applying it with a toothpick or cocktail stick. And where's our toothpicks here? And we're just taking small amounts of this. We have to be pretty careful with applying this. We don't want to overdo it in terms of the glue, and there's a little bit of time to get this down, but you have to be reasonably quick before this glue starts to go off. So we're just running it through. We don't need to go right to the edges, because when we apply the other half, that's sort of going to squish the glue out a little bit. And I don't worry about this ornate corner support, because I sort of worry that the glue will actually squeeze out and actually fill in the cavities. So just a thin bit of glue down these strips here, and it doesn't need to be applied to the entire area, I don't think. It's really just enough to really lock it together. So let's apply that glue, and then if we get our other half, and I butt it up against that block at the end, and then just apply a little bit of pressure to lock it in. So the different levels and so forth of the raised areas of here are all designed in such a way as to support the different protruding parts of this structure, so that when I press this down, it's not bending or bowing or anything like that. Like it's nice and solid underneath my fingers to press this down. So we can now lift that out. This glue does go off pretty quickly once you've got the two surfaces together. And we'll just pop that out, and that's one of our columns now glued together, the two halves glued together, and it gives you the I-beam, it gives you the round post and the upper support structure. So I'll go ahead and do the rest of these, and also mask up the areas that are going to remain white, and at that point we can actually begin to assemble the entire canopy structure. Right, so I've now glued the two halves of these columns and girder structures together now, so you can now see there's three different types really. There's two end ones, which of course don't have the upper apex section, two shorter ones for in here, and then these two longer ones. So I thought before I go ahead and actually start masking up these columns and the corner supports, we'll actually just do a test fit and see how it goes. So what I've got here, this is just a piece of card in here that I've laser cut out, and it's just basically taped to the underside of the station just to keep it in place. So it's not, this is just purely a template or a guide. It's not part of the actual forecourt area of the station. So it's got these little wee square holes cut out, which is where these posts are actually going to slot into, and it's essentially there as a guide and to sort of hold it all together when it comes to putting the structure together. So the slots pre-cut in the walls, and then of course the brick paper texture has been cut away, allowing these girder sections or the I-beam sections to actually slot into the wall. Now I've simplified it to just simply a single, like a lowercase I or lowercase l or something, as opposed to the I-beam part that actually goes into the wall. So we can slot these in here, and the longer ones that stretch further. So the good thing about, I guess in a way, laser cutting and 3D printing is you can get the components pretty accurate. Now that's not to say that it takes a little bit of trial and error until you get an accurate fit, particularly when working at the scale, but it's really sort of, it's working out the geometry. So they're the I-beams and columns in place there, and then what we've got here is these are kind of like the base fascia structure. So this is not what's actually going to be seen. There will be an additional fascia that will go on afterwards, and it's got these little wee kind of pegs on it, and they're actually designed to slot either side of the upper supports here. So we're just going to gently push these on. So in a way, really, I can sort of pre-assemble the entire structure without actually using any glue at this point. So everything kind of clips into place or slots into place, and once it's in place, then we, of course, we can use our thin CA glue to drizzle small amounts of glue into the joints, and then that's it, it's locked into place. So we've got another section which is basically identical. So you notice that a lot of the components are basically mirrored, so that we end up with not having to worry too much about if we get something in the wrong place. So that slots into there. We can push these down. Now the one component that I haven't designed up or printed yet is the actual canopy framework itself, so the glass structure. And the reason for that is, what I want to do is assemble the base structure, the lower structure, and then from there what I can actually do is work out more accurately the profile of the glass and the frame work that holds the glass in place. Right, so that's got the rear fascia in. Got a bit of an unsteady hand here because I'm so nervous about something breaking, but I have to say actually the PLA material is actually really very durable. It's quite flexible. It doesn't really break, it bends if you force it, and some of these elements, they're so intricate that it's quite important not to bend them, and I have accidentally bent some elements that I've had to reprint. So this is now that the lengthways girder structure which runs down the ridge, and it basically slots in between the perpendicular sections so that's the structure temporarily assembled, and it's worked out pretty well. I'm quite happy with how it all fits together, and it fits together and holds its own without glue at this point, which is good. Means that when it comes to the gluing side of things, things aren't going to fly out of place. So what I'll do is take all this apart again, and we'll mask up these posts and the corner supports, and then reassemble the entire structure again with the masking in place, and we'll glue this all together. Right, so I've now reassembled the canopy structure, and we now of course got our components here that are remaining white masked off, and I found the easiest way to do that was to lay down strips of that masking tape onto some label paper backing sheet, so I could then measure it up correctly and trim out strips of the masking tape that fit exactly in where they need to go. So for the component, the part of the column, and then of course also for the decorative corner supports. So the plan now is that we're going to drizzle some glue into some of these joints, and rather than dispensing directly from this bottle, because this tends to actually gush out, and this of course is the thin CA glue, I'm going to try a method of dispensing some of this into a small lid, or it's actually an end cap for a plumbing pipe, which I thought might be the best bet, made of metal, and using a paper clip and seeing if I can actually just gather some drips of glue to feed in here, but I'm hoping this is going to work. And I don't know whether it is actually working, so I might have to dispense from the actual bottle, but I've just got to be so careful doing the method from the bottle, because the last thing I want is glue gushing out everywhere. It might be the way to go, is to drop the glue onto the paper clip. So we've got a small drip. Yeah, so this is the method, is to drip the glue from the bottle onto the end of the paper clip. Right, so I've got some glue drizzled in there. Let's just hope that seals, and I actually just noticed that this is actually starting to, the masking tape starting to peel up on these posts, which is rather annoying. So I don't know whether it's the glue that's actually done that, maybe it's reacted. And I'm getting glue on everything, and I don't want to stick my fingers together. Right, so I'll come back when I've cleaned myself up and got rid of all of this glue. Right, so I've cleaned up the glue a little bit, and this is still curing, but it's certainly, I mean, it's anchored in place now, which is good. The only thing is I haven't done these joints in here because they're too close to the building, and I just didn't want this glue to end up on the brickwork. So once this is set, then I'll take the whole canopy out, because it'll just slide out, and then I'll do these joints in here once it's off the side of the building. So once I've done that, and also sorted out the masking tape that's sort of peeling away from the posts a bit, which is a bit annoying. It didn't actually do that on the tests that I did on these two test pieces here. For some reason it's doing it now. I'm not quite sure why, and I wonder whether it's the glue or the vapor in the glue is causing it to lift up. Bit annoying, because I may have to reapply those bits of masking tape, but I'm not going to do any painting today because it is probably one of the coldest days I've ever come across, where it's about 7 degrees, but I think the wind chill factor is about probably 1 or 2 or even less. So I'm not going to do any spray painting because it's just not warm enough and the garage is freezing. So it's going to have to wait until we get a bit of warmer weather. So there we have it. We're certainly making a bit of a headway with the canopy, and of course, as I mentioned previously, we've still got to actually work out the framework for the glazing as well. So that's the top area. So we may get into that in the next episode. Of course, I've also got to wait for a little bit of warmer weather so that we can spray paint the base canopy structure. Now, I've actually gone ahead and taken off those bits of masking tape that keep unraveling off the posts, and what I'll do is I'll reapply those when the weather's warmer and close to the time when I actually do the spray painting, because otherwise it's just going to keep unraveling, I think. But what I'll be doing in the meantime is beginning the design work for the upper section of the canopy. So that's the glaze section and the framing that the glazing fits within. So another task that I'll continue on with, of course, is the interior as well. So that's the final interior layer, which of course has the decor printed on it as well, and that will complete the interior as far as that goes. And then of course there's also all the interior furniture to sort out and add as well. So I'll leave it there for today's episode. I certainly hope you've gained some inspiration and ideas for your own layouts, and gained a little bit of insight into the potential and scope of 3D printing. It's certainly definitely becoming a bit of a game changer as far as my scratch built models are concerned. So I'll sign off for now. Do take care, look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.